Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a privilege for me to be here at the Times of India Lit Fest. When the curators of this festival, Bachi Karkaria and Namita, met me a few months ago, they brought about that the theme this year is going to be Water Nama, and I felt that this was perhaps the most apt theme for a lit fest in the city of Mumbai, because the city of Mumbai is all about water. And I thought I will speak on Mumbai's connect with the oceans over the history of the city. But let me first highlight that this is not a history class, and I am not a historian. I don't claim to be a historian. I only have about 40 years of connect with the oceans in my service in the Navy. And what I'm going to do is explain to you how the growth of the city, the maritime growth in the city, the commercial growth in the city, or the city now being known as the commercial capital of India, as also the growth of this city as a cosmopolitan hub, how all these facets are intertwined. Now, before I talk about Mumbai, let me first put in perspective the maritime aspects as far as India is concerned. As most of you know, India is a maritime nation, and we are surrounded by water on three sides. We are peninsular. There is an ocean which is named the Indian Ocean. And the origins of our maritime heritage in India date back to the Indus Valley civilization, which very recently, as has been brought out, is the cradle of humankind and one of the oldest civilizations, or the oldest civilization, being about 8,000 years old. There is evidence to suggest that the inhabitants of Indus Valley, which was called Maluha at that time, they had links, maritime links, with Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is present-day Iraq, with Magan, which is the present-day Oman, with trading posts at Dilmun, which is present-day Bahrain. Centuries later, this connect on the western side of India was also to get expanded on the eastern side of India. In the 4th and 5th century BC, the Kalinga in the state of Odisha, present-day Odisha, was the hub of maritime activity. In Ceylon, the first king in Ceylon, Sri Vijay, was of Kalingan origin. We had connection with the Southeast Asian countries right up to Korea. There is a legend in Korea of Queen Ho. But Queen Ho was a princess from India, and Princess Suri Ratna was her name. And even today, there are over 6 million descendants from Queen Ho in South Korea. With Bali, of course, the connection was even deeper. Even today, there is a festival celebrated in Odisha called Bali Yatra, which is celebrated every year in November. During this festival, many women build boats, make boats, and pray for their seafaring husbands. Similar ritual is also followed in Bali. And most of you know that 84% of people in Bali practice Balinese Hinduism. The ancient maritime story about India cannot be complete without talking about the Cholas. The Cholas were perhaps the longest reigning empire, the longest ruling dynasty in the world. They ruled for nearly 1,000 years, over 1,000 years. And what you can see is the territories and subordinates which were controlled by the Cholas, not just in South India, Southeast India, but also to Southeast Asia and what we today call as South Asia. This period from just about the 1st century BC to 13th century AD is also known as the Golden Age in India. And this Golden Age was primarily because of maritime trade, which was in silk and in spices. The South Indian ports in South India, they were thriving in 7th, 8th, 9th centuries. And at each of these ports, the revenue was phenomenal at that time. There are estimates that the revenue on the East Coast was to the tune of 200 mons, which is equivalent to about 8 tons of gold on a daily basis. That was the kind of revenue at that time on the East Coast of India. But while trade and commerce were the primary drivers for our connect with both the West and the East, but it was not just trade and commerce. It was also culture, religion, food, agriculture, art, science, diplomacy. All these aspects were also connecting India to both the East as well as the West. But somehow, after the 13th century, the maritime side in India started to go on a decline. There was disintegration of kingdoms in South India, and as you know, there were attacks from the northwest in India. We also, as far as the seas and oceans are concerned, we also had the Arabs coming in and the Chinese coming in. Subsequently, in the later years, we had the colonial powers coming in after the age of discovery in Europe. Now, when Vasco da Gama was on his exploration of the world and trying to explore particularly India, Mumbai was a group of 7 motley islands. These 7 islands, as you can see. Later, in early 16th century, around 1509, the Portuguese fleet under Francisco de Almeida hit upon the coast of Basin, the present-day Vasai. When they hit upon this coast, Almeida thought that this is the best place for his ships, for his fleet to be berthed and to be housed. He started attacking. This was at that time under Gujarat. The Sultan Bahadur Shah of Gujarat was controlling Basin or Vasai. And Almeida started repeatedly attacking Basin or Vasai. And these attacks continued for about 25 years. After which the Sultan of Gujarat relented, and what is known as Treaty of Basin was signed, and the control of these 7 islands, which is Mumbai, the control of these 7 islands was transferred to the Portuguese. The Portuguese, for the first time, called these 7 islands Bombay. And Bombay means good bay, from where the name Bombay subsequently was derived. The Portuguese divided these islands into manors. The earliest colonial structure to come up in any of these islands in Mumbai is the manor house, which today is in the naval dockyard where we all work. It's about 200 meters, 300 meters from my office. The first wooden structure to come up in Mumbai. Today we have some offices there, and the structure is available only in parts. One of his early residents was Dr. Garcia the Horta. He's a very famous person who contributed a lot to Mumbai. He himself was a physician, botanist, anthropologist. In addition, the Portuguese built forts. There is a fort in Bandra in Mud Island that was built by the Portuguese. They built churches. Here in this area, the St. Andrew's Church, built by them. The St. Michael's Church in Mahim, also built by them. The next interesting chapter in the maritime history of Mumbai was when Mumbai, these 7 islands of Mumbai, when Mumbai became a wedding present. King Charles II of England married Portuguese Princess Catherine of Braganza, and the Portuguese king gave these 7 islands. Remember earlier I mentioned that it was transferred from the Sultanate of Gujarat to the Portuguese and was under the control of Portuguese. And the Portuguese king, at the time of this wedding, gave these 7 islands to the British, to the English as dowry. And therefore, Mumbai got transferred to the English in dowry. The crown himself, the king himself of England, subsequently handed over these islands to the East India Company. The actual handover took place in 1668, about 350 years, exactly 350 years ago, in the same manor house that I was talking about, which is about 300 meters from my office today, where this transfer took place, and the control of Mumbai and the 7 islands of Mumbai came to the East India Company. And the control was transferred by the English king to the East India Company at an annual lease of 10 pounds. This also then became the house, the manor house became the house of the British governor, governor of Bombay. And the second governor of Bombay, Gerard Ongier, very famous person because he did a lot for development of Mumbai in terms of bringing in law and order, bringing civic facilities, inviting people from other parts of India to Mumbai to make it more cosmopolitan, giving religious freedom to people of Mumbai. All these things were done by Ongier, and which made him very famous. It is also important to remember that the first mint in India was set up at this manor house itself, and the first coins that were made in India, they were called copperoons, and these coins were made at this particular manor house in the naval dockyard. The manor house was thereafter fortified to become a castle. The British fortified. There were a number of reasons for this fortification because of the threats to their fleet, threats to their offices. The fortification took place of the manor house and it became Bombay Castle. One of the other reasons for fortifications in Mumbai was that at that time there was conflict developing at sea between the Marathas, the Siddhis, the Mughals, and the European powers. And the naval hero at that time at sea was a Maratha legend by the name Kanoji Angre. Kanoji Angre was a Sarkhel or an admiral in the Maratha Navy. And he is today also regarded one of the most notable sea warriors India has produced because he kept attacking a number of merchant ships from the East India Company and from other companies at long distances farther away from the coast of Mumbai. Today also, when we talk about a blue water navy, today also when we talk about a strategic vision for carrying out operations at larger distances away from our coast, this was the strategy or this was the philosophy that was being adopted by Kanoji Angre himself. He was to a large extent aided by the growth of shipbuilding in India at that time, and boats and shipbuilding became quite popular in India. This tradition was followed up both on the east coast of India and west coast of India, but particularly on the west coast where boats called urus were being made, dhows were being made, and they were continuing trade to the Arabian Peninsula as well as to the east coast of Africa. At this time, in the United Kingdom, there was dearth of wood, and the English realized the importance of Malabar teak, which is the wood found in this region, and the importance of some of the artisans that you have in this part of the world who are known as mistris or master craftsmen. It is at that time that the East India Company thought of starting warship building in India. Until then, while we were making dhows and boats in India, but warship building was not going on in India. So at that time, the East India Company decided to start warship building in India. But to start warship building in India, they needed some master craftsmen, as I mentioned earlier, a mistri of repute. And they zeroed in on a Parsi shipbuilder by the name Lauji Nusarwanji Wadia, who was at that time working in Surat. They went to him, they approached him and asked him to come to Mumbai, relocate to Mumbai, and he was offered 1,000 rupees for this relocation along with his family. But this 1,000 rupees relocation offered to Lauji Wadia today is equivalent to about $2 million, $2 million US. This was the money that was paid to Mr. Wadia to shift from Surat and set up shop or set up shipbuilding in the city of Mumbai, and warship building started in Mumbai in 1735. And the Bombay dockyard was set up at that time. In the next 160 years or so, 7 generations of Wadias built nearly 355 warships of global standards. Today, once again, shipbuilding as an industry in India is going through some phases. Globally, we are looking at how shipbuilding happens in the West and in China. But here it is important to remember that shipbuilding at that time in India was one of the finest in the world. Some of the ships built by the Wadias over that 160 years in India saw action around the world. One of the oldest ships afloat today is in UK right now, in Hartlepool, near Liverpool. HMS Trincomalee was also built here. HMS Minden was built in Mumbai, on which when United States got its independence, the instrument was signed. The naval dockyard became a worthy successor to the Bombay dockyard, and today the naval dockyard employs about 10,000 people and is the repair and refitting yard of the Indian Navy. But the important point to note is that when warship building was brought to Mumbai, it started a number of ancillary industries around Mumbai and led to start of many small-scale and medium scale, what we today refer to as MSMEs and small sector enterprises. The commercial landscape in Mumbai began to change from about early 18th century. There was, as you know, there was trade in cotton, there was trade in indigo, there was trade in linen that was happening. All this trade grew exponentially. Money started coming into Mumbai, profits started coming in, and new trading communities started getting developed in the city of Mumbai. The origins of the stock exchange. Now, this is something that is not very well known or not fully appreciated. Today, most of you, many people see how to invest money, or many people are in the financial sector. Now, today you have private equity firms, you have NBFCs, you have stock exchanges, you have TV channels which are covering details of securities and stocks 24/7. But the concept of securities in India started when initially ships used to go on voyages, and East India Company was on the lookout for some investors to put in their money for each voyage. They soon realized that some of the voyages were not successful because of bad weather, because of pirates. They would not reach their destination and the entire money was lost. So what they thought of was to club all the voyages in a year together. And when you club all the voyages together, then you see at the end of the year what is the profit or loss. Even if 20% of the voyages do not get through, 80% get through, you still make a profit. So they started selling securities. You could buy securities, and then at the end of the year, you could get what today we refer to as dividend. In today's terminology in stock exchanges, we call dividend. This concept of dividend started by clubbing all the maritime voyages together, and at the end of the year, looking at the profit and distributing the profit to people who were holding those securities. This was also the reason for emergence of the banking sector in Mumbai. The maritime trade was also the reason for emergence of banking sector and the insurance sector in the city of Mumbai. And all these things happened in the vicinity of the naval dockyard. The stock exchanges that we are talking about, the first set of stock brokers came to Mumbai in the 1850s. There were 6 stockbrokers who came to Mumbai in the 1850s, and they were trading under a banyan tree around the area which is today called the Horniman Circle. And this was all happening just outside the naval dockyard, just next to Apollo Bandar and next to what today is the naval dockyard, so that when the goods arrived, the trading could take place in that area itself. In the period thereafter, in 1853, as you know, was the introduction of railway. The first rail or train in India ran between, as you know, between Thane and Boribandar in Mumbai. Subsequently, it linked up rest of the country, and now what was happening was that the external trade starting from Mumbai was now getting linked to the internal trade within the country. External trade got linked to the internal trade. You could come by a steamer, land at Mumbai, arrive at Mumbai by a steamer, go across, take a train, newly started train, and go all the way to northwest frontier province. And that is why one train was named the Frontier Mail. And the Frontier Mail is still on. It used to take people who used to come by a steamer, get off at Apollo Bandar, then move to VT, take a train, and then go all the way to the northwest frontier province. Subsequently, of course, opening of the Suez Canal led to more development of activity, trade activity in Mumbai. Then came the setting up of Mumbai Port Trust, and the eastern seafront berths and breakwaters and everything came up, and the Mumbai harbour developed more thereafter. all this development in Mumbai created more demand for real estate. This area where people were trading started getting congested. And now reclamation became the new theme. Reclamation and connecting these 7 islands that I indicated earlier, which have their own history as to how they got transferred in dowry. These 7 islands, now there was a plan to start connecting these islands. The first 2 islands of Mumbai, the first major project to connect 2 islands was to connect Bombay, the island of Bombay, and the island of Worli. Connecting these 2 islands was a very difficult task. It required an embankment to be created, some sea walls had to be created, and because of the fury of the sea, because of the Arabian Sea getting rough, these sea walls that were being created or these bunds that were being created used to collapse every now and then, and they were finding it very difficult to do this connection. At that time, an engineer by the name Prabhu, this is the story, that he had a dream, and in his dream, he had goddess Mahalakshmi come to him along with 2 other goddesses, and she told Mr. Prabhu that there are 3 idols in that area in the water, and they need to be removed before any reclamation and this connection work can be done. He managed to retrieve these idols physically. These idols were found, and he brought these idols and put them in a temple, and that is why after him this area is called Prabhadevi today, where Mr. Prabhu brought these idols and put them in a temple. And then Mumbai or Bombay, the island of Bombay was connected to the island of Worli. Subsequently, there were more reclamation projects, a large number of reclamation projects. Each has its own story. I will not go into the details. Whether the Back Bay reclamation project or the reclamation in Colaba Woods or shifting of marines to an area which is called Marine Lines and subsequently is called Marine Drive. It is not for any other reason. It is because the Marines used to live in that area. So when King George V landed at what is Gateway of India today, Mumbai had already earned the sobriquet of Urbs Prima, which means the foremost city in India. It was already the foremost city in India. And as I highlighted earlier, all this had happened because of this strong linkage between the maritime side, between the commercial side, and between the growth as a cosmopolitan city. In parallel, there was development as far as the Navy was concerned. About 400 years ago, a small squadron of ships was set up here. About 6 ships were set up in Mumbai, and this subsequently came to be known as the Indian Marine, and from Indian Marine, it became the Royal Indian Navy in 1934, and of course the Indian Navy after independence. And after independence in 1968 came the Western Naval Command, which is headquartered here, which at present I am privileged to command. And this is the Golden Jubilee year of the Western Naval Command. We have just completed 50 years in 2018. The Navy, since independence too, has grown along with the rest of the growth of India. And today, we have a formidable strength here of more than 60 ships, large number of aircraft and submarines. And the overall landscape is changing here as well. Now, the naval growth is going to continue as far as Mumbai is concerned, and we have other areas where development is taking place. But having seen this past background and the growth of Mumbai as a city, with waters all around and with waters leading or really driving the growth of the city, it is important to note that this phenomena is not going to change. In fact, if anything, right now, it is becoming even more important. Let me explain why. Firstly, today, the maritime domain is the central piece which is driving both the geopolitics as well as the geoeconomics. We have today not just the Indian Ocean, we are increasingly referring to the area as Indo-Pacific. Indo-Pacific is today not just the area of importance as far as geopolitics is concerned, it is also the arena for geopolitical contestation. It is also the arena for geoeconomics. Today, in the Indo-Pacific, everybody has been talking about that Asia is the center of gravity. But why is Asia the center of gravity? The reason is, today, almost 77 to 80% of the global trade. 2 years ago, the total global trade was about $15.5 trillion. Asia's share in that was $11.8 trillion, which is about 77%. So 77% of the global trade is happening in Asia. And more importantly, much of this trade, almost all of this trade, is originated in India and terminating in India, which used to happen 150 years ago in Europe. This is the change that has happened, and that is why this is called the center of gravity. It is the maritime underbelly of Asia which is making it the center of gravity of the world. You may ask why this area called Indo-Pacific is not a strategic, not a coherent strategic space. Yes, there are many differences, dissimilarities, but it is the interconnectedness of this area which is driving the geopolitics as well as geoeconomics of this region. As far as India is concerned, as you know, 97% of our trade by volume and 78% of our trade by value is transacted by the sea. About 100,000 ships move in the waters around us every year. 66% of the world's oil, 50% of the container traffic, 33% of the world's cargo is all moving in the areas around us. And these figures are only going to grow. And as I mentioned, it is both from geopolitical point of view as well as from geoeconomic point of view that the waters around us are now gaining even more importance, as is the history of Mumbai telling us. And in a way, we are coming around one full circle. Trade, economic activity, Indian government is focusing on what is called as blue economy, and port-led industrialization, port-led connectivity, coastal community development, all these issues are creation of direct jobs, indirect jobs, is all part of Project Sagarmala as part of blue economy. And therefore, the focus is in this area, and this focus is going to be sustained. Today, when two heads of states meet, whenever two heads of state meet, when our Prime Minister meets another President or Prime Minister, the first thing that you see in the joint statement that is issued at the end of the summit or bilateral talks is the talk about maritime security. This was not the case 7 to 8 years ago. It is the case today. And today in our area, just like I covered European powers, and today again we have a large number of other powers, other navies operating in this area. We have more than 100 warships from different navies, from almost 40 navies operating in this area. And therefore, both the challenges as well as opportunities in this area are rising, and there is increased focus on the seas around us, and therefore, this focus is going to make the city of Mumbai as well as other major and minor ports in India even more important. But it is important for us to recognize the development of Mumbai as a maritime city, as a commercial city, and as a cosmopolitan city, all happening together. And I have no doubt that this journey is going to be sustained in the years ahead. Thank you. Jai Hind.